The good news is, trust me when I say this, if you practice these practices the way they're meant to be done, if you're sincere about this, if you really get this teaching and you understand the possibility, and because of that, you know that you can eventually get yourself free from being upset and angry. You know that you can get yourself free from, saying and doing things that are a waste of your energy and a waste of your time, that are unrealistic, right? The thing about it is this. I can tell you from my own experience, right, that if you stay the course, that will extinguish in time. Because as I listen to you share, right, I remember that. I remember that. I remember when getting angry had a life of its own. I remember when getting angry, once it passed a certain point, there was no going back. Once it passed a certain point, I was 100% convinced that I needed to say what I was going to say next. 100% convinced that I couldn't allow the other one to get away with this. Got to stop you before you take this too far, right? Yeah, that's the survival mechanism, That's the survival coming up. It's not survival of the personality. I mean, it's not survival of the physical body, it's survival of the personality. When you have that feeling that you've been betrayed or someone's behaving a certain way with you that you can't allow that. You have to stop that. You can't accept that. You have to say something about that. And if they don't hear you, you have to raise your voice. And if it happens again, you're going to raise your voice louder, and so forth and so on, right? What I can tell you is that way of suffering, when I look back at I think there are probably three things that represent most of the suffering that people do. One is being anxious. Feeling uncomfortable in your own skin, not being at home in your life, not being at home in your body, right? That's one. Another one is depression, feeling a sense of futility, like nothing matters, like nothing's ever going to work out, it's hopeless, right? That's another one that comes up. Right? And then the other one is rage or anger, rage or anger. Rage or anger is a way, it's a reaction to what's happening when the personality feels like the personality is being suffocated. When the personality is being overwhelmed or suffocated, right? Because the personality's constitution, like a country has a constitution, the personality's constitution is to survive and to be right, and to avoid domination and to dominate, right? If you're in a relationship with another human being, or with your kids, or your parents, right? And you really give yourself the opportunity to stop and take a good look at what's going on, you'll be able to see how you react to feeling dominated. If it feels like somebody's controlling you, you'll be able to see how you automatically go into a resistance to that, a rejection of that, okay? And try and get back into control, which means you will dominate, right? That's why in marriages there's so much conflict, because in a marriage, right, there are a lot of things that the married couple has to deal with that they have to make decisions about as a couple, right? And there are going to be a lot of those things they have to make decisions about that they're going to be disagreeing about. So then the question is, then what happens? Right? What happens if the way I see it is this way and the way you see it is that way, and we have to come up with a conclusion? In most marriages, in your average, ordinary, neurotic marriage, in most marriages, one will concede to the other and then hold resentment. One will concede to the other and then hold resentment, that I still disagree with you, but I'm not willing to fight about it, so I'll let this go, right? What people don't realize when you do that, right, is that resentment starts to be a deposit that you keep putting more in. That's an account that you keep putting more in every time you resent something. And you don't notice that it's building, right? You don't notice that it's building. And then one day, there's this decision that the couple has to make, right? And they're in a conversation about how to make this decision and who's right and who's wrong, right? And one of the two people blows up and says, "That's it, I want a divorce." And what they're speaking from is the resentment file. The resentment is now so big that there's no way to resolve it. The only way to resolve it is to get out of the relationship completely, right? It happens, according to statistics, more than 50% of the time, right? But as I've said here many times, and when I say what I'm about to say, I'm not just guessing. I've been in this business for 45 years. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of people in regard to issues in relationship, right? So I'm pretty certain I've seen what happens, right? And what happens is that the people who don't get divorced, right, stay together, but they're divorced. They're divorced. Emotionally, they're divorced, right? So they're staying together because they don't want to give the money up. They don't want to give the property up, you know. They don't want to go through the lawyer thing and all that jazz. So they stay together. And they can even become friendly. They can even become friendly. We used to have sex. We used to be in love. Now we're just kind of cooperating. And if you look at that number in terms of how many people are in that condition, now you're getting up into the 90s. Yeah. It's very unusual. It's very unique and unusual for people to actually have a relationship that works, where there's no resentment, where there was open and free expression of love, open and free expression of, you know, kindness and compassion and love. It doesn't mean that you're bad and wrong if that's the case. It just means that your personality has manifest the way it works. Your personality has manifest its character. It manifests its constitution. And through the practice of meditation and through the learning about these teachings and through wisdom, you can start to come to an understanding about what needs to be resolved. And you can start to actively resolve that through practicing meditation and learning about the truth. Eventually, the rage that you couldn't control, if you stay the course, eventually it will be less intense so that you could control it, at least in terms of acting it out, right? And then the next level of it is I'm not acting it out, but now I'm making myself miserable because I'm upset, okay? But that too will change if you stay the course. That's the thing, you know, that's why I say here so many times that the problem with this process is that it takes time, and we are more and more being indoctrinated with the idea of not being patient with time. I call it the Amazon effect, right? That people can't deal with the idea that this process and this practice is going to take time. They want it now. And if it doesn't happen now, they question whether it's ever going to happen. If it doesn't happen now, they don't have time for this. They want something faster, you know, want something faster. Maybe the day will come, if we survive, where there will be a way of getting direct contact with the brain, right, and being able to change things in the brain. If you could change things in the brain, you could just reprogram the brain to be enlightened. We're not there. That's not going to happen for us, right? So you got to do it yourself. It's an internal job. You got to do it yourself. And it takes longer because the way to do it is to experience what's going on that's unworkable, but not get involved. To be aware of what's happening in your mind when your mind goes off the rails. Be aware of what's happening in your body when the emotions go crazy, right? But see it for what it is. You now know what's going on. That's the difference. And because now you know what's going on, you don't act it out unless it really is a useful thing to do, a realistic thing to do. And you are able to be with what's going on in your body and your brain, right, without believing in it. Without believing in it. And if you could be with it without believing in it, and because you see it for what it really is, you don't get involved with it, you just turn your attention elsewhere, right? That material will die its own death. It'll die a natural death. Yeah. If you don't feed the dog, it'll die. If you don't feed the thoughts, they'll die, right? And your attention is the energy that feeds the thoughts. So now you have, a way. Now you have a way to deal with the condition that you find yourself in. But it's going to take consistent practice. It's going to take consistent practice. And even when you begin to wake up, you've got to practice staying awake as long and as much as possible so you don't miss something that comes up that's going to cause you to suffer. So, I've talked about formal practice, and the formal practice is where we're learning about meditation, and the formal practice is where we're practicing meditation, and the purpose of the formal practice is to experience meditation and to learn to meditate and to learn to deepen the experience of the meditative state. That's what the formal practice is for. Right? It's preparation for the informal practice. Look at this. How many people, as I've learned more about this, one of the things that came up for me is I noticed that for most people, the informal practice is never talked about. If you look around, even in traditional Zen practice, right, they don't talk about any informal practice. It's only the informal practice, right? And the idea they have is that if you do the formal practice the way it's meant to be done over time, and then, of course, if you're doing it from the Zen tradition, you do retreats, and it's not just a daily practice, right? That you will wake up in time, right? And the way the Zen tradition looks at it is that it will be a natural evolution. In other words, you'll just wake up naturally over time. As you wake up a little bit, it'll keep opening up a little more and a little more, right? But doing the formal practice can take a long time. Doing the formal practice, because every time you're not practicing, the brain goes back into default state again. Every time you're not practicing, you go back into crazy. Right? So the informal practice is really, in my opinion, the informal practice is the real deal. Because now you know what you're doing if you learned how to meditate. You can get yourself deep enough into the meditative state because you've been doing the formal practice. Now you can start to do that informally. And to do it informally, you now have to be able to experience, in order for the informal practice to work, you've got to be able to experience thinking and being resting as awareness at the same time. When we're doing the formal practice, we're not doing that. We're moving away from thinking, so it's easier, right, to be aware of awareness and aware of the body breathing, right? And if we get good enough at the formal practice, we're ready to now go into informal practice, which means that we're going to practice now in life during everything that's happening. Meaning during thinking, during emotions, during all kinds of circumstances, you're going to continue to practice resting as awareness. So in order to know that you can do that, one of the things that you would probably need to check out, if you're practicing formally for a while now and you feel like you're able to get into a meditative state, right, in your formal practice, right, then the next step you want to take is, can I be in this meditative state? Can I rest as this awareness while thinking is happening? That's what you want to play around with. Can I rest as awareness while thinking is happening? Can I rest as awareness when I'm upset emotionally? Can I rest as awareness when I'm dealing with the world? Can I rest as awareness when I'm dealing with circumstances? Can I rest as awareness when I'm in traffic? Can I rest as awareness when I'm doing my taxes? That's a big one for me. What is it in your life that makes it difficult for you to relax and be in your true nature, in the natural state? What is it in your life? That would be very challenging to do that. This is the informal practice. And then to do the informal practice for brief periods of time as often as possible. So in the beginning, all we're asking you to do is, can you experience being resting as awareness while you're thinking? Maybe only for a few moments, okay? But still, you've experienced it. Maybe only for a few moments. That's why the informal practice says rest as awareness for brief moments as often as possible. Because in the beginning, that's all you're going to be able to do. It's like learning how to ride a bike. You're only going to be able to pedal a couple of times before you have to put your foot down, right? But if you stay with the informal process, right, the next step in the informal process, once you begin to practice it, right, say you've been practicing the informal process for a couple of months. The next step is to then stop and take a look. How many times are you actually doing this a day? If you're doing the informal practice, are you aware enough of what you're doing to be able to tell me how many times? Just give me a general number. You know what I mean? What is it, half a dozen, something like that, right? It won't be a high number. It won't be a high number, right? But then the next thing you want to do, if you've succeeded in knowing that you can at least do it, even if it's only for a couple of moments at a time, and even if it's only for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times during the day, right? Then the next question is, what could I do to increase that number? What do you think?
Rest and awareness every chance you get.
Yeah, but you have to remember to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
That is.
It's a challenge because you're involved with the world. You're involved with all the things you're involved with, you know? So to remember to do it becomes a challenge, right? So how can you deal with that challenge so that you're doing it more often?
So we should be doing it now, huh?
Of course.
Okay.
But I'm not, what I'm saying is this is a process, right? This is a process. But if the process is going to work, you have to do it consciously. And you have to understand that to just practice doing this for brief moments as often as possible, oh, that's all well and good, right? But then the next thing is, how often are you doing it? It won't be a big number. But then the next question is, how can you increase the number? See, listen, if you understand what I've been saying to you since I've been doing this class, this is your project, not my project. You know, if you understand, so you should be asking yourself these questions because it's your project. You should want to know. You should want to know, what would it take for me to be doing this many more times during a day? Yeah, because the goal that I have is that I want to get to a point where I'm doing this often enough, right, that it becomes redundant. I'm doing this often enough that there's no way that I could not be aware. Do you know what I mean? There's no way that I could not be aware because I've been doing it so often, right? That's where you want to get to. But in order to get to that, you have to do it more times than you started doing it. So how are you going to increase the number? Yeah, but that takes care of itself because if you don't sleep, you get tired. If you don't eat, you get hungry. Okay? But you can stay crazy and you don't feel any difference. Because everybody's crazy, you fit right in.
Is there an answer?
So there are a lot of things that you can set to remind you to do things, aren't there?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, a lot of Buddhists wear mala beads on their wrists, right? Right? If they're doing a mantra, they'll hold on to one bead every time they do the mantra, and then they'll go to the next bead, right? So they turn it into something that will keep them focused, okay? In my car, I have a thing hanging from the rearview mirror, a little thing that somebody gave me with a picture of the Buddha on it, right? When I'm driving the car, whenever I see that, it reminds me to rest as awareness. That's all I'm talking about.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. But that's what it takes. See, that's what it takes. That's what you have to be willing to do if you're serious about wanting to stay awake. You know, you have to do whatever it's going to take to keep you awake. It's like driving a car. I remember when I was a kid, I drove across country, and on the way home, I drove from North Dakota to New Jersey nonstop, right? So on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, I was hallucinating. But I knew I had to stay awake.
Yeah.
Do you understand? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. I knew I had to stay awake, so I put the windows down, you know, to have the wind. I turned the radio up. I had somebody in the car. I said, watch me. If you see me falling asleep, shake me, right? That's the way you have to approach this. Because your being asleep is just as dangerous as it was for me to drive that car. Really. Really. Because being asleep causes people to die. Doesn't it? Being asleep causes people to die. It doesn't just cause suffering. It causes, the condition that people are living in of ignorance and suffering and being blind is causing them to not be able to take care of their physical body. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, causing them not to be able to relate to other people in a meaningful, workable way, right? So it's causing a lot of negative consequences, right? You're unhappy, your body's dying sooner than it has to, and your relationships suck. What more motivation do you need to practice this, right? You know, one of the reasons that's not enough is because the personality has no problem lying. Personality has no problem lying. Okay? If you say, oh, you know, most people are suffering and most people are miserable, they're anxious, they're depressed, or this, or that, the other thing, you know, most of the people that are walking around, you know, that are considering themselves to be average normal people, right? If you tried to point that out to them, they deny it. Oh, I'm happy. What are you talking about? I'm fine. I'm happy. But if you followed that person around and you watch what they were putting in their mouth to stay happy, you watch what they were doing to their body or watch how they were relating to other people, you would see that can't possibly be true. But the personality wants to look good. It's one of its major intentions, isn't it? To look good. You know, you want to look good. So so I'm not kidding when I say this practice and these teachings are about going sane. They really are about going sane. Because a lot of what people are doing, a lot of the way people are behaving can't be understood any other way than that it's insane. It doesn't make any sense. It's crazy. And yet we do it. We do it. You know, if you really paid attention to your own behavior, I guarantee you there's crazy there. Guarantee you there's crazy there, right? And most people make it a point not to pay attention that way because they don't want to see that, right? But the people that you're living with that are, you know, that they're putting up with you will help you to see it. They'll point it out, right? So we're all innocent. We're all innocent, right? There's no reason to feel like there's anything wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you, right? It's just that you got brought up and raised by crazy people. And you live in a crazy world and you live in a crazy country. That's all. But you can still go sane. You can still go sane. You can practice your way out of this condition.